Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Travis Newbell. I live and work here at Shambhala Mountain Center, where we host lots of interesting programs, and we're especially excited about one that's coming up later in February called The Four Noble Truths of Wealth: The Path to Genuine Prosperity. And that's led by Layth Matthews, who I'm so fortunate to have here today to have some discussion. That retreat takes place February 20th to the 22nd, by the way, and you can learn more about it on our website, shambhalamountain.org. Layth Matthews is the author of The Four Noble Truths of Wealth, a Buddhist view of economic life. He is a Shambhala Buddhist teacher, economist, and financial professional. He lives in Victoria, British Columbia with his wife and three children, and I think that's where he's joining us from today. Layth, thanks so much for coming and spending some time today.
Oh, nice to see you, Travis.
So I think that maybe it's less strange sounding than it used to be for a Buddhist teacher to be presenting on wealth and economy and this sort of thing. But to begin with, I wonder if you may just introduce us to the view of wealth, prosperity, and the flip side of poverty that you present in your book and in your teachings.
Yeah, well, it does seem incongruous. My friends in business school used to ask me, how could you possibly be in business school and call yourself a Buddhist at the same time? But fortunately, I was a student of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche and some other teachers who had a very broad and subtle understanding of the Buddha Dharma. And essentially, the answer to the question of how a Buddhist teacher could be talking about wealth and livelihood, or how you might think about that, is that you have to start where you are. And we live in this world of ours with all kinds of material decisions to make. We have economic challenges, and we have a life the way it is. And so the way into the essence of what the Buddha offered is always beginning with where we are. And here we are.
Mm-hmm.
So to the extent that we can make some connection between our spiritual practice, or between higher wisdom and the penetrating practicalities, as Chogyam Trungpa used to say, of everyday life, first of all, that's going to be very powerful. But the other interesting thing that became more and more obvious as I researched and contemplated this book was that actually having a deeper insight or a clearer perspective on how things work, one's own motivation, but also understanding mind in general, human mind, and kind of what actually brings about genuine prosperity for oneself and others, is not incongruous with sort of moving more skillfully in the material sense.
Mm.
So you can make a distinction between material wealth and materialism, where material wealth has obvious value, but diminishing returns from a spiritual point of view. That, and that's part of what confuses us, because at the very lower levels, until your basic needs are met, material wealth is actually a very direct path towards prosperity. And then at some point, there starts to be less and less of a connection.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I've actually got there's a chart in the back of the book that tries to reflect that.
Yeah, a couple of teachings were coming to mind as you were talking, and one is I think that this came from Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. I heard it spoken by David Nichtern, who's another Shambhala teacher, but something about how like money is somehow like a good or perfect barometer with how we are engaging in our lives and in the phenomenal world.
Yeah.
And so I think that like, and also represented in like our money situation is clearly, and I know this comes from Chogyam Trungpa, you see karma like very clearly, the cause and effect of decisions that you have made and what that has led to. And so I guess we can see, if we're really attuned to our life, what did you call it? The penetrating particulars?
Practicalities.
Practicalities. Yeah. So, and it's almost, I think that money is a painful thing for people in that way, because a lot of self-worth or lack of that sort of thrown back at us when we see our bank account and I have been successful or I haven't been, and so that occurs, and I think is maybe really a painful thing for people. And so you emphasize making friends with yourself a lot.
Yeah.
So I see how maybe that comes in at this point.
Yeah. Well, just to go back to what David Nichtern's reference was from Chogyam Trungpa's teachings about money and wealth, and to talk about money as a karmic feedback system, which it definitely is. But I think one's whole life is a karmic feedback system, and including money. And so I think the point there is not so much to try to interpret what the money thing is saying to you too heavily, but rather not to throw it out. To incorporate the financial feedback as grounding. And any conventional economist would tell you that that's the best means of, the money situation, the income that you're generating, the value of your product or your work is reflected in the marketplace, and that's actually intended to be a reflection of its need, right? Ultimately, somewhere along the line. I think where our modern society gets mixed up is that we haven't made very good friends with ourselves, and so we have a lot of weird needs from a Buddhist point of view, because we're trying to solve a lot of internal problems externally, because we just sort of skipped over that part, about reflecting on who we are. And I think the more that we reflect on ourselves and we come to a deeper understanding of what it is to be human, then I think we can actually have a more intelligent relationship with our economic side of our life.
And that reminds me of something that you've written, that is, wealth is a matter of perception.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something that sounds true at first from the spiritual perspective, and then it's like there's like this sort of but that kind of bubbles up from that. But, and so how do you say that to someone? What do you say to someone if they respond to that with, but like I'm struggling so badly, and like I don't see wealth in my life and in my situation, and like how do you what's the next statement or elaboration of that?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I think is going to be interesting about this weekend and kind of getting into this material is that it's really about how do you work with wealth on the spot. how do you start working with prosperity now, immediately? And in that sense, how can you make it workable starting from wherever you are, whether you're in a strong position or you're in a weak position? From the Buddhist point of view, that kind of conventional life is cyclical anyway, so whether you're in a strong position or a weak position, chances are you're going back around again. But that's just from the personal point of view. But ultimately, that's that idea that wealth is always and everywhere a matter of perception. That's kind of a quote. That's a quote that I riffed off of a very famous free market economist, Milton Friedman. And he had a quote that said, inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomena. So that's one of those profound ideas that just happen to fit into a great proverb, sort of like Marshall McLuhan saying the medium is the message, right? So, but wealth is always and everywhere a matter of perception. It's so obvious, right? It's so straightforward, but that's easier to understand, intellectually than it is to get, deeper. That's a lifetime or multi-lifetime journey, hey?
Yeah.
But I would say it is obvious, because whatever material comfort that we get is always coming in through our perceptions, and not least of which the Tibetans would include, in addition to the 5 perceptions, they would include the 6th perception, which is mind. So whatever our experience is always coming to us through the filter and interpretation of our minds. And so if we want to be prosperous, internally or externally, we need to make that relationship with mind and understand a little bit more about how that works and how prosperity ultimately occurs, and how it comes in and how we essentially struggle with it. In terms of somebody who is struggling themselves and kind of how do I work with my situation, it's so difficult, it's hard. And I think the first thing to do is to understand that it is difficult. It can be very frustrating to work with your financial position, and it's kind of a abstract idea that you could bounce out of that. On the other hand, the more that you understand your own role in your own prosperity, the more that you have a possibility of recognizing wealthiness and richness internally and externally, and that may be the gateway through which a more workable relationship with economic life can come in.
And so how does, before we wrap up, how does meditation come into play, like with everything that you just said about our perspective as, in dealing with the reality of our situation?
Well, meditation is a perfect fit. It is the way that we work most straightforwardly with the mind aspect of our experience in terms of perception. I mean, practicing the sitting meditation in the simplest sense is a practice of opening up our perception. And so there is that aspect. So right on the spot, it's almost like you are increasing your wealth in the immediate sense most directly by taking your seat. But also the practice of sitting meditation is like opening a window, that only opens with the combination of gentleness and discipline. And those two things we often don't combine. But when we combine them, as Shakyamuni Buddha discovered, there's some certain kinds of wisdom and humor actually come in. And, you know, it could be that money and workability of our economic life actually comes to us, or comes to comes toward wealthiness, rather than having to go and overcome, you know, an endless list of prerequisites to achieve wealth externally.
Hmm.
So
There's a,
meditation, yeah. So meditation is, in that respect, especially if we understand a little bit more about it, and we kind of it is the most direct way to make a relationship with ourselves, which actually turns out to be a very powerful way to get more accurate information and communication with the external world as well.
so I think I heard you right when you suggested the possibility of money coming towards wealth.
Mm.
That's like a pretty nice contemporary koan there.
Yeah. Well, this you know, I've worked with money, you know, for many years. I've been working my entire adult life, and actually before I was an adult, I've been involved with business and finance and from different angles. And one of the things that you begin to realize when you're working in that space is that it's not like money and wealth is scarce. Actually, the people who are in control of money are desperate for places where to put their money to greatest effect. So it's really about return on investment. So really, if you can establish a attractive container for money, the money will find its way to you. So what does that mean, to be an attractive container? Well, it has to do with some understanding of the needs of people and what people want. And there's a lot of people with great wealth who want to do very altruistic things. And I think the first thing about being able to engage in that stream is to really understand it, to be not that foreign to oneself. So I think that even though I try to push it back, in the course of this program, I will be talking a little bit as we go through, just sharing my own insight about how you can actually work with your financial situation directly. But I don't overemphasize that, because the work that most of us need to do that's going to actually be most effective in terms of having a healthy relationship with economic life, that is internal work. It's that we actually have to change the way we are. And there was a guy, I read a book by, I can't remember the name of that book right now, but he had this way of expressing it, which is, there's a difference between appreciation and desperation. And so if we think that wealth only comes in from external sources, then we're kind of tending toward grasping. And there's a quality of desperation about it. We're feeling that we are incomplete and we need to be completed externally. But if we have a greater sense of our own inherent richness, that in fact our richness is a matter of perception, at the end of the day, that's all you want to buy with your money, is those rich perceptions, right, of body, speech, and mind. So if we understand it that way, then we can appreciate things from a much wealthier place. And that's very magnetizing. for anybody, right? You want to be around somebody who's not who's basically helping you reflect on your own richness.
Layth, I want to thank you. This wisdom that you're offering is so relevant and I think so helpful, and what a lot of people really are need to hear. And so we're really looking forward to having you up here to go deeper into all of this in the weekend program that you mentioned and I mentioned earlier. I wonder if there's anything else in particular that you'd like to say about that program that you're leading up here on the land before we close.
I would just like to guarantee. I would like to give my personal guarantee that if you set foot on the land of Shambhala Mountain Center, you will be wealthy almost immediately, one way or another. And I'm looking forward very much to engaging with everybody and opening up some very interesting windows together.
Awesome. Well, I back that guarantee. I live here. This is Travis. Back that guarantee. And I hope to see many of you who are listening and watching this up here on the land, February 20th to the 22nd, for the Four Noble Truths of Wealth, The Path to Genuine Prosperity, which Layth Matthews, who's been speaking with us today, is going to be leading, and I'll definitely be participating, and I'm really looking forward to that. So please come, and if you can't make it up to this retreat, please come up to the land sometime, because the wealth here is here, waiting for you. So thanks for listening and watching, and Layth, thanks again so much for taking the time and sharing some wisdom today.
Thank you, Travis.
And you can learn more about the program and check out more interviews like this, as well as lots of other blogs from teachers who come to the land by visiting shambhalamountain.org. So check out the website, stay in touch, and we'll be seeing you soon. Bye.